Now, whether we think it's fair or whether we think it unfair, the rich often declare bankruptcy. Personal bankruptcy does not mean poverty. None of that inference is correct. And I ask you, when you hear evidence of that, to consider how it is that Mr. Guo, who did not have any personal assets at that time, because the CCP was the one that had seized his property, there was a time, and you will hear evidence coming in, that Mr. Guo was to pay a fine of almost $100 million within a few days. And that is what leads to a filing of bankruptcy. But the government's request that from that you draw the conclusion of guilt, again, is a misplaced request. The government will argue throughout this case that what Mr. Guo did was simply unlawful. They will ask you to say, you can be persecuted and you can still be a fraud. And when they ask you that, I ask you to think about how the evidence shows them to be wrong. The government isn't just saying that there is a fraud. What the government is asking you to do is to conclude that Mr. Guo defrauded essentially himself, because he is the whistleblower movement, and the whistleblower movement is him. So when they ask you to take a look at the evidence that comes in, the evidence of wealth, the evidence of spending, the evidence of luxury, I ask you to evaluate all of that evidence in the context which I have described. And if you do so, and if you evaluate the evidence, understanding how difficult it was for these entities to survive, and how each one of the people who worked for these entities worked hard to maintain and forward a whistleblower movement, you will reach the only logical conclusion in this case, that Mr. Guo is not guilty of the 12 counts of the indictment. Thank you.